Creole is a language of resistance rather than just a Black language, because it does have influence of European languages, and you can have different Creoles. You can have a Portuguese Creole that they speak in like Cape Verde and those kinds of places, because they were more colonized by the Portuguese people. But then the original people that were there, their language still maintains. And then you can have a Spanish Creole, you can have a French Creole, which has more an English Creole that they speak in Jamaica, for example, Patois.
Yes.
And so I think Creoles are languages of just resistance, which I think ties quite well into like this idea of Black identity, if you do want to like funnel it down something. But yeah, of survival, of resistance, of joy, of passion, of commitment.
Yes, exactly. Well, you guys are sisters. I would like to know a little bit more about your background, like literally from we are born and then kind of work yourself up until here. Yes.
So we were both born and raised in Saint Lucia. Indy moved here when she was 5.
Yeah.
When she was 5, with my mum. And they were here for a year, and then I moved the following year, and I was 13 at the time that I moved. But yeah, it's been a journey. I think living in Saint Lucia, we were always exposed to a lot of different cultures, just a lot. We traveled a lot. My mom had a really nice group of friends that we'd see loads of different things. So like she had a very good Trini best friend, and so always exposed to like Trini food and just different things. And like our grandmothers, for example, only spoke Creole, so we were always exposed to just like so many things. But then moving to London really shifted how my mom then wanted to raise us, and she wanted to maintain you're a Saint Lucian even though you're in London. And so I think the language was a really big part of that, in terms of, I think at some point Indy stopped remembering Creole, and my mom banned us from speaking English a little. She's like, when you speak to Indira, speak in Creole only. And I'm like, okay, no problem.
Yes.
And so I think my mom was a really big part of us then maintaining like our identity as Saint Lucian, and like that connection that we have to Saint Lucia. And so, yeah, I think that's been a really big part of our journey. And
yes, and I think that's really precious, because there's so many people that migrate to London or to England, and then they kind of like are ashamed of the language, but they're scared that in school it would make issues. You know, sometimes teachers would sit African parents down and say, oh, language barrier and things, and then at home you're not allowed to speak the mother tongue anymore. You now have to speak English. And I love to hear that your mom was like, nope, that's not what we're going to do. We're going to do exactly the opposite, because it's true, English will come naturally. You children, you're like a blank paper still.
Yeah.
Your mind is still quite fresh and open for new knowledge and information, where it's so hard to overwrite. But you're naturally going to learn what's in your environment. But what is not in your environment, the Creole, that's what's going to get lost somewhere in your subconscious mind. So really cool that she did that. Also culturally, not just the language, but that's like hand in hand, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. And did you have like an issue with, how is it with English in St. Lucia? That's just also,
so English is our main language, our first language.
Okay.
And then Creole is our second language.
Okay.
Which isn't taught in schools, but you just learn Creole through your environment. And for us, like our grandparents, great-grandparents mainly speak Creole. So Creole was always around us in everything that we did.
So you told me in a conversation before that in St. Lucia, Creole would be classed as a poor man's language. What do you think, like, because, you know, why do you think your mom didn't, like, didn't conform to that, and you know, thought that this is important? What was her mindset behind that, you think? Like,
yeah, I think our mother is a very strong-minded woman. We're from the south in Saint Lucia, from the southeast, and in that kind of region, compared to the north, Northerners generally don't speak a lot of Creole, because that's where investment goes, that's where tourism happens, etc. But in the south, a lot of us were farmers and are farmers. And so even someone like my father is an entrepreneur, but on his like identity cards, it will say farmer, even though that's not his name. But there's a pride in our roots, in our history, that both of our parents have, especially like, pardon?
They've come from farming families.
Yeah, they both come from farming families. And so there's just this pride of, this is our roots, you know, like without farmers, where are we in this world today? And so she has her own understanding, her own pride that she's just setting to us, which I'm really thankful for.
Absolutely.
Yes, it's so important that we don't just look at, like, probably the North is like where they lose their culture, where they want to Europeanize and modernize, and this is exactly where we lose our culture. And if you think of the roots and where we really come from, where the soul lies, this is sadly, unfortunately, with the people that are still rich in their culture, are still cultural connected, and they have that pride and that ancient knowledge even within them. This is where the soul is of the planet even.
Yeah.
So, and how it's connected to farming, which is also very interesting, because that's also a very deep-rooted industry that is more important than all the, like, the foundations of all the other industries, actually, because you can be in finance, but if you haven't eaten, it's going to take care of yourself. But we overlook it and not appreciate it and not respect it. And it's easy for me to say, or for us that are more like Europeanized or like living in London, basically, but for actually to be from there and come from it and then still hold the pride, that's even more so, because you can easily look at the glitz and glam of the westernized society and think, oh, I want that, or I want to be like that, I want to have nothing to do with that. But yeah, so it's nice. That's where true pride comes from, that actually where you can build something up and raise your children on. And you really embody that.
Yeah, so we both went to school, she went to primary school, went to secondary school here, and
university.
And uni. And then we've just been working on loads of different things. So Indy does poetry, I do a lot of other things, like modeling, just loads of other things. And I think during the pandemic, we both had time to think of what do we want our output to be. And part of that was creating a space for our sister relationship to just live. Because I think a lot of people find it fascinating that we are quite far in age, but also really close. Like, we're literally best friends.
Yes.
And everyone finds our relationship fascinating. I think we wanted to just hold a space for that and have a space for that. And so, we'll create a page, an Instagram page, to just have our sister relationship, but also speak about certain things that we'd speak about at home that people wouldn't necessarily speak about with their parents. We've had our mom on our Instagram talking about a lot of things that maybe most moms wouldn't be comfortable talking about. We spoke about things with our friends, with ex-partners, just had really open conversations. But Creole has always been a part of that. And I think in doing that, people then started asking us to teach, which we didn't want to do, we didn't plan out to do, didn't set out to do.
Because there's no curriculum that exists for it.
Yeah, so we've had to create all the material for our course. So there's maybe certain lessons where it's like a listening activity, and I've had to change my voice 3 times or 5 times because we've had to create all of the material. And so it was a bit daunting to create a course, and we're like, nah, we don't do that, people don't do that. But with more encouragement, we then created a course, built out a curriculum, started teaching people virtually. And yeah, since then we've grown, we've gone to Saint Lucia, we've run programs there, we've run workshops. We did stuff in the community we're from because we think it's so important to reinvest in the arts, in artists, in the kids. And now we are here. We've launched our video course at the end of last year, which has been good, just to free up our time and our space to give us other things to do. We started doing our supper clubs as well.
Yes.
Like, the supper clubs are also, like, honestly one of my highlights of the things that we do, because it's such a nice way to connect people, because you realize how much food, like, oh, I have this dish too, but we have it with certain, like, different ingredients, which is really nice.
And just teaching people about that as well. Really, it's a supper club that's around food anthropology, so that people understand how we're all connected. We all have this discussion of whether it's plantain or plantain in African and Caribbean communities, but it's not even ours, like, and so that's just so important to have people sat down and talking and listening and learning around food.
So, speaking about Creole, like, could you tell us a little bit more about the history of Creole and how it developed from when it began to where it is now, because language are constantly developing. Is Creole still developing? Because okay, so let's start.
Definitely
with the
still developing. That's even funny because I remember, like, maybe a year or 2 years ago, when I was like, I think I have a language capsule, and I think a lot of us who are of the diaspora, we go through this feeling where, like, when we go back home, we're like, wait, people don't use that slang anymore.
Yes.
And it's like, And now you're the odd one. You were already odd because your accent has changed and different things about you is different. Maybe the way you dress, the way you enunciate certain things are really different. And then your slang is different. Aha.
You're ready to pay full price for everything.
Right? Because they're like, the way
absolutely
she
not.
said that was not of a home person kind of thing.
Yeah,
But that's when I bust out the Creole, so you know.
Yeah.
I'm from here.
that is so important.
I'm from here.
Mhm.
Yes.
But yeah, so the language is still developing, and yeah, because people are still alive, people are still developing, new things are still happening. But the history of the language is that the first kind of people that were on the island are the Arawaks, and then the Caribs came over and they kind of killed off the Arawak men and took the
Arawak, can you get into that a little bit more? Is it the tribal people of Saint Lucia?
Yeah, the indigenous
Can we get
people.
into that even more? Because I have never heard of that. I feel so stupid.
No, but
Yes.
you don't know something until you know something,
Yes,
right?
please.
Yeah, so our indigenous people in the Caribbean islands, and specifically I'll speak to like kind of Grenada, St. Vincent, Martinique, Dominica, and Saint Lucia, because our history is quite similar in terms of migration of people, whereas other islands, they're a little bit different kind of thing. So originally we had the indigenous people, which are the Arawak people, and they were described to have like red skin and to be quite like peaceful. But again, when you kind of look at history extracts, you kind of have to take them with a pinch of salt, because who were they written by, right? They were written by colonizers. So even the description of people, sometimes you have to be like, was that completely, so that's just like but that's kind of how they've been described to us. Like they were peaceful people who were very kind and welcoming to strangers kind of thing. So they were the indigenous people. And then the Caribs, who kind of came from like Mexico, from Puerto Rico, from like South America, then came over to our islands. And they started populating. They started killing off the men and taking the Arawak women as their own. And even in that, you start seeing like language kind of changing and developing, because now you have Carib people and Arawak women coupling and creating
Mixed
Family.
children.
mixed children.
Tribal mixed children.
That sense. And so, the language between like Carib men would be like Carib language, and then the language between, like, I was even reading an extract where Arawak women had to then like learn Carib language to speak to their men, but then the language that they would speak to their children would be different to kind of maintain the language, their identity. So this is, Creole, what it is today, and it is so ancestral to us to maintain things through language. And so a lot of the language that we have, the flora and fauna that we have in our Creole, our French Creole language, is from those two groups of people, the Arawak and the Carib people, right?
And those two languages were two completely different languages.
Yes, they were different languages, but they were people of the land. So even things like cassava comes from our Arawak indigenous people, and how we know how to use cassava, because we eat a lot of cassava in the Caribbean, whether that's in food or even making stuff out of it, whatever, because cassava is quite like toxic. The skin of it's toxic. If you don't know how to like burn it properly and stuff, it could kill you. So our people taught us, and we have that stuff from them. And then the kind of first kind of people that's kind of coming over in the 1600s was kind of like the Portuguese. Oh, hello, hi, son. Thank you.
No. Okay.
Well, then like in the 1600s, you started seeing Portuguese merchants and stuff kind of coming through. And then in the 1700s, I believe, then you started seeing the French colonizers coming through. Wow. And the French then started bringing people from Senegambia, from Benin. You had a lot of like Chui people, the Efo people, the Ewe people coming into the Caribbean through chattel slavery. And so you now have loads of different groups of people coming in. How are they starting to understand each other? Because they're from different groups of people. So they start, okay, now let's try and like understand each other. So a lot of the structure that we have from our Creole is from Mandinka and Wolof. So where we put our articles, if you like in English, how we say like the cat, in Creole we say cat the.
And that comes from the Mandinka language.
Yeah, Mandinka and Wolof.
Okay.
Right, and so that kind of maintained and stayed, and that's because they were the kind of first people kind of imported into the land. And generally, you'll see that where the kind of first people who settled into a land, their grammatical structures kind of remain. And so, yeah, there was loads of people kind of come in, boom. And then again, because they had French people, so now our language starts to incorporate French. Boom, 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 as the French start to communicate, start to trade, and so forth. And then, like, the 1800s, you then have the English and the French now starting to battle for Saint Lucia and different Caribbean islands. And so you have some words that are then English in our language. And, yeah, that's kind of the history of our language kind of forming. And then, of course, you then have, like, I was also reading about, you know, the Portuguese and how traders, for example, the Carib traders would then have a specific language with the Portuguese traders that was a bit of Portuguese, Spanish, French, and like it was Creole in and of itself that they would speak only to traders so that they could be understood and that they can understand and they could barter. And so, yeah, that's kind of how our language has developed over time.
So it was also very used to kind of like have like a secret, not a secret language, but like a language between you and your people that the outsiders can't understand.
That's really important. Absolutely a secret language. We joke about it all the time because a lot of things in Creole have double or triple meaning sometimes. And so there's a phrase we use in our group chat all the time, which is simegwen, which means to spread seeds or to sow your seeds. But it also means to like just chill about, hang about,
to laze around
and not really do anything. And so seeing the double entendre of literally that phrase alone that we all love of simegwen, which, oh, your master might think, oh, you're going to sow seeds.
But really? To your people, they're saying, I'm chilling.
I'm hanging out.
I love that. Yeah. Give me more. I want another one.
What's another one that's like a double entendre?
I can't think of any off the top, but there are just loads of words that just have loads of different meanings. Like the word "san," for example, S-A-N, which means 100. It means without, and it means blood. So sometimes certain words will have so many different meanings that I think it's like it is a powerful.
It's a powerful language, and it's like a very historical language.
Mm-hmm.
It's I guess it's a new language, but it's just as ancient as other languages. I mean, I have really zero to none linguistic knowledge, but it's a very interesting language, very dynamic and it has layers. Like there's lots of layers to this. It's literally the language of our history as a people as well, not just Creole people, but us as a people in general. If you have like blackness, and you said it's a language of resistance, but then also if you look at the term black and how we use it, it's also a resistant term because it wouldn't exist if we didn't go through all of that. Because we would still all just be Africans, or we still all just be, So it's very charged as well. And how do you feel like in relation to, obviously back then this language was really important to keep Creole, for people of Caribbean descent, let's say, to speak the language, to have like a secret language for each other, to keep the identity, and obviously how it's been like a mix of different languages depending on the history and who migrated into the countries. But how do you think how relevant is it in today's world? Because people sometimes would be like, languages that don't make you money basically are not important. That's why everybody wants to speak Mandarin now. Everybody wants to speak like
English.
It's so frustrating because there's so much more to us as people, as human beings, outside of finance, outside of how much money you make. There's so much knowledge in our languages, not only in Creole, but in our home languages, right? The medications, the use of how to use things, it's embedded in our language. There are some things that, like, I don't even know, like the English, my first, like when I think, oh, I need like tea, right? My first thing is to think of it in Creole, like the herbs and the roots, like cinnamon or different things that we use. Like, so that's essential to us as human beings for our survival, for our livelihoods, outside of just, oh, I need to make money, so let me, understand.
Speak your language. Yes. And we are fortunately, like, as a society, often, most times in the West, we going towards a direction where it's all about capitalism. It's all about capitalizing of something. And then it's also like, also everything is just modernized. And there's so much ancient knowledge in languages that are dying. And I posted it the other day because there's this Nigerian billionaire that made it from nothing to something, and he studied Yoruba.
Yeah.
And he was saying that he was laughed at by so many people. Like,
Mm-hmm.
why would you go and study that language?
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because, you know, you're not going to make any money. And it's for a long time, he had this degree, and people were like, you're stupid. And he didn't make any money. So it's like, that's why you studied Yoruba. That's why you don't make any money. And he was also talking about how much ancient knowledge there is and how proud he is now, because a few years later, everybody's singing Yoruba songs and wants to know these things.
What
and
does that mean?
Yes.
All sorts, yeah.
And he's like, he was one of the pathfinders. So why do you feel like people that come to you and take part at your course or part at your workshops or come to your supper club, why do they come? Like, when you speak to them, what are their reasons to want to learn or learn more Creole?
I think it's a lot of people wanted to learn language in like any circumstances, about connecting to people around you, but also yourself. I think there's something so, like, when you know how to, if you're in a country that they don't speak the language that you normally speak, just being able to order something for yourself or just get around by yourself, it's so freeing rather than having to then either rely on an app or somebody else. It puts you in a different position. Or if you go somewhere and you're saying thank you to someone in their language, that's received so much nicer, and they may be willing to help you that you don't know, like, to do anything, because suddenly you've spoken to them in their language and they're like, oh, you have tried and you've made that effort. So I think a lot of language is about connecting with people around you, and yourself. So I think that's a big thing of why people want to. For example, I had a student who learned Creole, didn't tell his grandmother. She'd mainly speak Creole, and it was her birthday, I think, and he wrote her birthday card in Creole, and she had to then read it for the whole family. She was like, wait, how do you even know how to write this?
Yes.
And then also speaking to her, like, you know, in Creole, I think that was a lot. And so I think it's really about connecting, being able to connect with people around you.
And what do you think is the relationship to Creole from the people in Saint Lucia, for example? You know, do you have like a story that you can tell from your experiences with Creole in Saint Lucia, positively and negatively?
Yeah. I think it's still a thing where people in the South, we speak more Creole, and there is a pride that is around it still. I think in the North, it's a bit worrying. Like last year when we went to the schools, we came across one school where we had students that we brought down from Sutton Academy in the UK, and we brought them down for 10 days in Saint Lucian. They had some days where they would spend in the school. And the teachers were telling us the difference in how the students behave, their confidence levels. You can tell a stark difference in those who do speak Creole and those who don't speak Creole. The teachers would say to us how, and it was also evident, how rooted those children are, how confident, how they appear in class, in theatre arts classroom, in whatever it may be, that there's just a level of confidence that they walk with in the world because they know themselves a bit better. They also are able to connect to their grandparents better. They're also able to connect to their environment a lot easier. And so we see whilst there is stigma still, like in the North and stuff, there is that stigma still. Just even last week we were in England, and I said something in Creole to somebody, and she was asking me what we do, and I said, oh, we teach Creole, and she said, oh, the poor people language. I said, eh? And this is 2025, and she was an older woman, and she said to me, oh, the poor people language. Huh? And I was like, these things are still maintained in our heads because of colonization, because of colonialism, of what our language is. And so that still exists in our country to this day, and even within our diaspora. So it's a huge worry. And that's why we're trying so hard to do the work that we're doing, and making people aware that there is a writing system to maintain our language, to preserve it, because we show up differently. We show up with more pride in the world, yet alone just in our country. Because I think as well, sometimes with Saint Lucia, or just being in the Caribbean, in smaller areas, we kind of have a disconnect. We just think we're just small islanders. But when you then come to places like England, in Europe, where things are a lot more fast-paced and whatever, having that sense of self really does ground you and keep you afloat. So you're not just in the wind, just a bag in the wind,
Spinning.
flying around with no sense of direction.
So also talking about that, you do a program where you once a year take a group of children to Saint Lucia to teach them Creole. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So we've been working with a company called Caribbean Electives, and I think their whole thing is providing an elective to bring students from the UK to the Caribbean to, I guess, globalize them and show them more of the world, a different side of the world that they wouldn't necessarily be exposed to. We met them years ago, pitched an idea because we're like, we want to work with them, we love what they're doing, and we can see a path where our visions align. We created a program and sent it to them. And so from last year, we brought out a group of students. We brought out 21 students from Sutton. And how we set up our programs was we do Creole lessons in the morning until 12 days, 11 days?
10 days.
10 days, I'm stretched. So 10 days until we do Creole programs in the morning. And then in the afternoon, we do an art workshop. And so it's using different art practitioners from around the island. So whether that was a dance, we didn't do dance, no. We did a masquerade workshop. We did a workshop on carnival and resistance. We did an actual art workshop, drumming. And this was also, we also tried to work with people who are from the island, who are doing things around the island, because these are the creatives that the country rely on sometimes to put on events. And so we wanted to make sure we use these people because they have the knowledge. And why would we like hire somebody else, other people? Those people are there and they have the knowledge. And so yeah, that's what we do with them. And so mornings, Creole lessons, in the afternoons, some kind of art workshop. And it was so well received. Like we found one of the students teaching their parents Creole one day. I'm like, you will never use Creole again a day in your life. But the fact that she wanted to carry on that lifelong of it and teach it to her parents was so inspiring. I was like, oh, she has no connection to this land, but she felt so connected based off the lessons, based off her interactions, the experience in the country. And it's like, it's honestly been so heartwarming, and I can't wait to do it again this year.
Yes. And we're also gonna, obviously at the moment, working on kind of like getting a group of schools that are predominantly Black students, because I think that would just add so much to to themselves. Even if you're not Caribbean or if you from an African country, I think Creole can still going there and just seeing that there are other languages that people that like us speak that are not necessarily African language. I find that very fascinating. It is because it is also African language because there are so many African language embedded in the language, but it's not only African, it's really a language that kind of represents Blackness, if you want to use that term, because other people, not everybody wants to use the term. We do prefer to use the term melanated now. Yeah. But still, Blackness is still a term that everybody understands and can relate to.
And also, like, outside of language, culturally, like, for example, the masquerade workshop that we do, masquerade originates from Africa, but we have, because of our lineage, we've taken it in the Caribbean, and it's the form of masquerade that we do in the Caribbean. Carnival, in and of itself, again, like that, when we did the carnival workshop, we had an Indian student because we had to speak about the holy fests. And when we throw in paint and powder at fetes and so forth, that originates from an Asian lineage that is Indian, that's South Asian, right? But we have it in the Caribbean. And so outside of just language, there's even things for other students to pick up on.
It's like Diwali. It's connected to that.
Yeah. And so our culture, because how we structure our program is language and culture, it's a culture and heritage trip. There's something for everyone to like be like, oh, that's similar. Or even with our British students, even in your whiteness, you understand, this is how my ancestors have impact. This is not just Black history. And I think that's what's so important as well when we took our students, and them being predominantly white is also important for them to understand, because they're the next change makers, right? For them to also understand that this is outside of just Black history. This is also your history. There's no such thing as Black history that is separate to white people and whatever. It's all of our history. We've all contributed to how we are what we are today. And so like it's so important to have trips like that for young people so that they understand how they fit into the puzzle, the global puzzle.
And have a deeper understanding, because there's so much even when the whole BLM uproar was, so many white people will be like, well, I don't have slaves, or I don't do this, or I don't do. And it's just like, I think when you from young go to a trip and just not just read about it, but experience it more than just like having to answer a few questions on a test for school. I think that really makes more of for a change than, it has a substantial change. And obviously because children, they're still more like a blank paper, not completely. I mean, the kids are like 13, so they still already have a quite settled idea of the world, but it's not the same like a 36-year-old and you tell them through an Instagram post that they're racist,
No, it's just, I think the thing is just putting them in the environment to see and to actually experience something different, because you can sit in England and be like, oh, this is what they've told me about the world.
Yes.
But when you're there, you can't actually ignore what you know about the world. And so I think that I think what India was saying in terms of like, they are literally the next change makers, and so you would want them to have an understanding of other people, and so it's not them sitting with whatever ideology from whatever town they're from and be like, oh, this is where I'm from and this is all I know, but now you know more, so act like you know more, type of thing.
And what about the Saint Lucians? Does the average Saint Lucian feel connected to African cultures? Feel connected to like the history of Creole and what made them the people that they are at the moment? Is this a north-south thing again? Or
See, I have a very interesting hot take on this. I think in the last few years I've seen an uptick of people wanting to explore more of that, because our school system is a British school system. Like in reality,
colonial,
it is a British school system, and so what we're still taught a portion of our history. We're taught some of what they want us to know. And think about where are the books from, Collins and Harper and blah blah blah, British companies. And so the way that we're taught our own history is still very British in a way. And I think it's not till that we moved here, and also as an adult, that I'm now learning a lot about Caribbean history. And so I think in Saint Lucia there is definitely a shift, but I don't know if that shift is also happening in the school systems as well. Because I think that's when you then like, oh, I'm also these other things and wanting to know more of that. So yeah, I don't know.
Oh wow! So would you say like the Saint Lucian children of today, that everything you just told me about the history of Creole, they wouldn't be able to recall that?
Maybe not.
No.
I don't think so.
Because we're not taught Creole in school.
Yeah,
so if you're
there's
taught
no
that, you have to
importance.
learn the foundations of your language. But we're not taught it as yet. And
There's no
so,
highlights on it.
Wow!
so in what class would they be learning it? Hopefully they're learning maybe that a little bit in geography or history, but unlikely, because that doesn't fall into the curriculum. In England, I've never learned that about Creole. And so it's a very similar,
It's the same conversation.
it's a very similar curriculum.
So everybody speaks it, but especially in the South, but nobody learns about it basically.
Yeah, because it's all oral, and so you only learn it through your parents, family, etc.
So how did you do that then when you created your curriculum? Like you said that there are a few words you wouldn't know. You just make it up.
No. So there is a writing system.
Okay.
The language was oral, of course, like many languages. And in the 60s, the government standardized the language even in different parts of Saint Lucia. You have people saying things slightly different, right? Like how we say dumpling might be different, right? And so we do have a standardized writing system, but not many people know of it. And so we had to do a lot of research online, finding this book and this book and whatever, to figure out what is the standard, and then making that accessible to people, making it like, oh, because all of our research when we first started, it was just bits of things we were finding on the internet and books and random, pieces of information. And so putting it together where it is easy for someone to learn was how we do that.
Okay, what's your like each of you? What's your individual personal relationship with Creole? In terms of like, it's so hard to say like your personal relationship with the language. For example, like I speak German as well, and I can't stand it. I don't like to speak it at all because it's just complicated. I can say something in 3 words, a sentence in English, and then I go to German. I have to use 6 words, and you know, all these things. Like, I don't know, I just find it, yeah, and then it also reminds me of a lot of racism I went through, and it reminds me of being ostracized and ugly. Like, it really makes me feel like that. But I'm sure with Creole, you have an opposite experience. So can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. For me, I always think back to like my great granny. Creole for me is a lot about family, and like today, for example, before I was getting ready, I was speaking to my mom. There was somebody else in the room, so we had our entire conversation in Creole. Because she was in a room with somebody else, and she was like, "Well, I didn't want them to know what I'm saying," and so we had the. And so for me, Creole is a lot about family and just being able to share stories. For example, my great granny, for some reason, didn't think I spoke Creole. I don't know why. She had it in her head at some point that I didn't speak Creole. This is before she passed. And she'd always try to speak to me in English. And she'd try and mind you, her English was limited, very limited. And there was one day I was like, why are you doing this? Why are you speaking English? Why are you trying? And she was like, well, you go to school and you're educated and blah, blah, blah. And like basically I'm like, you know, you're so educated that I know you speak English and so I have to speak English to you and blah. And I'm like, yeah, but I also speak Creole. And she's like, oh, I've been using all my good little English. And I'm like, yeah, let's not do that anymore. And from that day, we never spoke in English ever again. And I think for me, it's about keeping that family story and keeping my family.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was sweet.
For me, my personal connection to Creole is similar to Kim, about family. But also for me, it's about like there's also like a political reverence that I hold for Creole that's like that puts a fire in my belly. When I went to school here and stuff, I now speak Spanish fluently, and I lived in Spain and stuff. And I did that based on capitalism, I suppose, and like also wanting to connect to people. I was like, I want to be able to like go to South America and just blend in, kind of thing. But with Creole, for me, it's like I got to a point where I was studying anthropology at Bristol University, and I was like, I'm learning so much about other people's cultures, what of my own, and that incited me to really, really like dive deep into our history, and I thank Creole for that, because for me, whilst food, I love food and stuff, like it's not, food isn't my thing that's going to make me dive deep as languages, because I love languages. Whenever I travel, I try my hardest to learn the bits in a language, like no matter where I am. And so, yeah, Creole has just maintained connection. But it's also, yeah, I just find it so powerful and so empowering. So, yeah.
Okay, and what about Saint Lucia and religion? Are people mainly Christians there, I guess? And is there any indigenous belief system? It's probably voodoo, or
so the island is mainly like Christian Catholic kind of thing, and we grew up in a somewhat Catholic ish. Not really, like I wasn't baptized.
Okay. Well, you just put the stamp there. As a
They're Catholic. They go to church sometimes.
Yes,
you know, kind of thing. In terms of our belief systems, of course, being people of African descent, there are people who still have beliefs of like voodoo, maybe, or what we say is obia,
yes,
right?
Okay, it's Yoruba actually.
Yeah. And we even have like syncretized versions of religion as well, which is interesting. And I know like a few people who also practice different things in Saint Lucia, but it's not commonly spoken about. It's very much like, even the language that we have in Creole around it is quite negative. And, you know, you think, why is that?
Yeah.
Because of colonizers. And so this belief that we had to have around our religions to not be empowered, right?
Yes.
For example, if you look at Haiti, how was the Haitian Revolution accomplished? Through voodoo. And people don't want to acknowledge that and don't want to speak about that. And even, like our language, like if you say like somebody's a gade or a gage, like it's quite like negative. It's quite like, oh, you don't want to be by that woman, that old woman, she's a gage kind of thing. But there is much to think about that in terms of
and
colonizers
how we see ourselves.
and how we see ourselves in our religion.
And that ties into culture,
Mm-hmm.
religion, and
Mm-hmm.
language, mainly those three things.
Yeah, and even something as simple as like medicines that we use, right? Like, generally witches and so forth are said to be people who work with nature. No, people who are
Yes.
brewing stuff together. Most of us know how to use plants to heal ourselves.
Yes.
Like we literally go to plants mainly in the Caribbean. Like in our household, we rarely take pills.
Yes.
Like, oh, you've got a headache? There's a Panadol. Like in Saint Lucia, there's a Panadol pill outside. Go take that. You've got a headache.
A Panadol
A plant. Sorry, not pill. A plant outside. You've got a headache. You've got something else. Or your stomach's hurting. Have some young guava leaves. Something. So we know how to work with the land and why we trying to shun ourselves away from that and pretend it's not us.
So much independence in actually indigenous cultures, like much more, and that's exactly what they don't like. They want us to depend on everything we need. Is it food? Is it medicine? Is it teaching? Is it God? Everything is gonna have to come from the West, like otherwise we're bad. Basically, I mean that's the main message. Yes,
it's all capitalism to make more money.
and it's about power, isn't it? When you control somebody's beliefs and what they eat and what they think and what they speak, I mean, you got them really.
Exactly.
Yes. Last one is more about like, what's your vision for Creole in the future? Like, you know, I feel like that teaching the world or teaching people Creole is like part of your calling. I would say. You feel like that?
Yeah.
Yes. And what is like your vision for Creole? Like, what do you want to see in the next decade?
Yeah, definitely want to see it in schools in Saint Lucia, and even in countries like Grenada where the language has died out. St. Vincent, for example, where they used to speak a Creole. Trinidad as well, where they used to speak a French-based Creole. To bring these languages back and in our country so that we preserve it so that it doesn't die out completely. Would love to see that. And then beyond that and beyond Creole, we have a calling, and our calling right now of our company of Twossaints is people getting connected to their languages. Unfortunately, we cannot offer 500 indigenous languages, right? We don't have the capacity for that. But it's getting people to really think about the importance of language for themselves, for their identity, for their homelands, for the future generations, and getting connected to that.
Also, like, yeah, it's a lot about connection, because even going to like Lagos and not being able to speak Yoruba, for example, it's like you really, even if they do speak English, they won't see you the same. Like, they will only see you, like, for example, if you speak Yoruba, if you don't speak Yoruba, you already paying a higher price. And it's just like a whole different way they approach you. It's like really, once you speak the language, they welcome you with the open arms and they're so happy and they really embrace you. Different than they do when you only speak your European language. So it really is about also connecting with back home, because that's when they really start feeling like, okay, you might look exactly the same, but when the language part is not there, for a lot of African countries, it's like, okay, but we're not the same still.
You're different. You're Muslim. You're Tubab. You're not of us.
Yes,
kind of thing.
So that's, in terms of connecting, it's very, very true. Even if because most times in Nigeria, for example, everybody speaks English too.
Yeah.
It's not that they can't speak it, but it's a whole different, it's like a spiritual connection.
It's a different energy. The language literally comes with a different energy. I always say this. Like, you speak Korean, so it's your personality. It comes from somewhere else, and so I think, just trying to speak a different language. And I always say this: as British people, we live here. We have a different accent, and so I think what I like to say is not being hindered by having a different accent. And like, I don't want to speak the language because I will sound this way. Okay, and
you left that country. You're not of that land, exactly, right? And that even like makes people stop learning a new language or getting connected to home, because it's like, oh, but my accent I don't sound like that place. You're never going to sound like that place. You can't sound like that place, exactly, because your personal story is that of someone living in America. You do have a different accent, but that's okay. It's about still trying.
Yes, exactly. And you know what happens a lot, I don't know how it is in Saint Lucia or with Creoles, like in African countries, like the in-laws or the family in Africa, they will make like a joke
about your accent.
I'm like, this is so common. But then again, why are we so sensitive? I mean, we're also very jokey people. Like,
But it's
you get
because it's saying
teased.
something about you though, and so that's why we're saying it's like, oh wait, I'm not good enough.
Because it's othering you.
That's
It's
what-
othering you.
Yeah.
But do you want to be othered as someone who's not even trying, or othered because you're trying? I don't know. To me, I prefer to be othered because I try,
Yes.
and I'm getting it wrong, and eventually you're gonna get it right. But you still will never sound exactly like them.
No.
But guess what? You're not them exactly.
Yes.
You left that land, and
Well,
that's
you've never been there.
but you've never been there. It's your first time back or whatever,
Yes.
and that's your personal story. So live in that. Take pride in that. You have growing up in London. I have an abundance of cultures around me.
Yes.
I understand certain things in Arabic that if I stayed in Saint Lucia, I would never understand. So take pride in that. That's why I sound like I have a British accent, because I've grown up here, and why my accent changes. And that's what we need to take pride in when we sound
Worldliness as
different.
well,
We
yes.
are worldly.
Yes.
We're shapeshifters. We go into different spaces and we're able to understand and to connect with different people because we are of the diaspora. And so even in that, there needs to be a diaspora pride that we have, that, yeah, our accent does sound different. Okay, but I'm trying.
Yes.
I'm connecting. You understood me.
That's it. Did you understand? My thing is, did you understand me? Yeah. Okay. Then nothing else has to be said because you
Yes.
understood. I made the effort and you understood exactly what I was saying.
So now it's just about you trying to make fun, and there's probably some insecurity within yourself that you're trying to put on somebody else for trying in their language. And it's just like, you just don't need to hold that. That's not your disappointment to hold. That's not your, no.
And on that note, one last thing, a call to action. What do you wanna, like, a message for the audience? What do you want them to do? Ideally, from here, from the interview,
Yes.
it can be just to remember. It could be like a message to remember on top of like something to do, an action.
Do you want to give one action? I'll give one action.
Yeah, sure. I would definitely say try to learn your indigenous language or a language to someone that's close to you if you don't have another indigenous language that is your own.
That's mine as well. That's mine. Try.
Try. That's it.
Why?
Why? Because it's important. Beyond capitalism, it's important for your spirit. It's important for your future generations. And so it's about preserving what our ancestors have started for us. That is our calling in this life, right? So preserve what is already there for you, was already embedded, that you might have lost along the way or whatever, but it's yours. So preserve it.
All right then.